Hi, this is Adam Blaylock, and you're listening to Adam the Movie Guy. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the show. Warning, the show you're about to listen to contains strong language and an unhinged host. Don't take me too serious, I'm doing a bit here, so stay the fuck off my back. Enjoy. If this shocks you, if this offends you, and you clicked on the wrong fucking podcast. Welcome everyone to another episode of Adam the Movie Guy. I am your ghoul of a host, Adam, and this episode is a double feature: the 1939 film Son of Frankenstein and the 1942 follow-up Ghost of Frankenstein. Now, the reason behind this is, well, out of all the Universal Frankenstein films, I never gave a fuck about these two movies. They're both a noticeable step down from the OG Frankenstein and the masterpiece that was Bride of Frankenstein, and a few factors could explain that, such as James Whale not returning to direct these two films, and both replaced and missing cast members that really would have elevated these two movies. But unfortunately, that wasn't the cards. So these two reviews are not going to be nearly as deep or enthusiastic as The Bride of Frankenstein or the original Frankenstein ones I did. So to save time, I'm pairing them both together. So let's get started first with the Son of Frankenstein. Okay, the 1939 Son of Frankenstein. The synopsis reads: Baron Wolf von Frankenstein is determined to prove the legitimacy of his father's scientific work, thus rescuing the family name from disgrace. With the help of Igor, a grave robber, Wolf successfully reanimates the monster his father originally brought back from the dead. But when several villagers are killed mysteriously, Wolf must find the culprit in order to vindicate his creation or face the possibility that he may be responsible. The film was directed by Roland V. Lee and starred Basil Rathbone as Baron Wolf von Frankenstein, the son of the previous doctor, Boris Karloff returning as the monster one last time, Bela Lugosi as Igor, Lionel Atwell as Inspector Krogh, Josephine Hutchison as Elsa Frankenstein, Baron Wolf's wife, Donnie Dunegan as Peter Frankenstein, the son of Baron Wolf, and Lawrence Grant as the Burgermaster. Now, the film kicks off with Henry Frankenstein dying off screen and the villagers, along with the village council members, being upset with the impending arrival of the late Henry Frankenstein's son, Wolf von Frankenstein, and his wife and young son. They do not want this fucking guy in their village, since having a Frankenstein brought them nothing but terror with his creation of the monster, and once it became public knowledge, it ruined the Frankenstein family name. Now, why they renamed the village after the Frankenstein family is beyond me, but I'll touch on that later. When Wolf and his family arrive to the village, all the villagers basically shun him and his family, with the exception of Inspector Krogh. And Dr. Frankenstein, Wolf Frankenstein, has somewhat of a cautious ally in Inspector Krogh, who got his arm ripped out of his socket when he was a little kid by the monster. Now that is fucking wild to picture, and I'm going to touch on that later as well. Inspector Krogh tries to warn Wolf Frankenstein that the villagers would not take kindly to his presence, and that there's been a recent string of murders affecting the village, and the rumor is that the monster is still alive and is the cause behind them. Wolf then encounters Igor in the old destroyed laboratory from the previous film and learns he was sentenced to hang due to robbing graves, and he survived with a broken neck and a damn bone sticking out, which was fucking disgusting to see. Igor then shows Wolf the hidden crypt of where the bodies of his father Henry Frankenstein and his grandfather, the old Baron, were laid to rest, along with the comatose body of a very much alive monster. The monster is very weak and needs to be revived with some lightning, so Wolf and Igor get to work preparing to revive him. Meanwhile, the consuls summon Igor and threaten him to be their inside man on the goings-on at Castle Frankenstein. The attempt to revive the monster is eventually successful, with Igor using the monster for revenge against the council members that sentence him to hang. With all these deaths occurring in the village, Inspector Krogh places Wolf under house arrest, preventing him and his family from leaving until Wolf is cleared from any wrongdoings. Eventually, this all culminates in a confrontation between Igor and Wolf inside the castle, with Wolf shooting Igor, and then Wolf defeats the monster by kicking him into a sulfur pit that conveniently seems to be below the laboratory of the Frankenstein castle. I don't know how, and who fucking cares? I mean, you had to get rid of the monster somehow. Wolf is then hailed as a hero for defeating the monster, and Igor and the Frankenstein name appears to have salvaged some of their previous good reputation. Wolf and his family bid the village farewell as they leave on the train. Well, that's all for the plot. Let's get into my thoughts of the film and some of the issues and questions I have of it. Now on to my thoughts of the film. I thought the story itself was somewhat fascinating, with the plot point of the son of Henry Frankenstein returning to his ancestral home and trying to salvage his family's reputation after the creation of the monster resulted in the death of many people. Which raises the question, when did the knowledge of who created the monster become public knowledge? Because in the previous film Bride, a plot point in that film was that Dr. Pretorius was blackmailing Dr. Frankenstein by threatening to reveal he was the monster's creator. Meanwhile, in this film, everybody and their mother knows who created the monster, and they all turned on the Frankenstein family. Another question, at what point did the monster rip Inspector Krogh's arm out of his socket? He said the monster ripped it off when he was a kid years ago, so the implication being the monster had to have done it sometime off-screen during Bride of Frankenstein. My theory is that this could have been part of the lost footage or something of the sort, since there was originally 20 deaths in that film before it got cut down, and during the monster's escape and rampage in that movie, you could tell watching that there was definitely more scenes of him just tearing shit up. It is possible that he encountered a young Inspector Krogh and tore his arm out of his socket at some point during that movie. However, this kind of leads to a big problem. It's out of character for the monster to do that. I just can't picture the monster doing that to a kid intentionally, even if he was pissed off. If Krogh was an older teen, then maybe, but not if he was a little kid. Another question. Why did they rename the village after the Frankenstein family if they turned on them and hated the family? The name was, I think, originally in Goldstadt. Now it's the village of Frankenstein. My theory on that is that once the monster and the murderers became public knowledge, maybe they decided, fuck it, let's cash in on this for tourism money. And that's the only explanation I can think of. It's stupid and in bad taste, but not completely unbelievable. Still fucking stupid, though. Now on to the characters. Basil Rathbone does a good job as Wolf Frankenstein with the burden of salvaging his family name and being shunned by the village, although he's no Colin Clive when it comes to being a Frankenstein. Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, kind of steals the show and is one sinister son of a bitch, which makes me question, why would Wolf trust this obvious snake of a man? I mean, for a supposedly intelligent doctor, why? Like, you could see right away that this motherfucker is up to no good. And he admitted that he was hung for grave robbery. And you're still gonna trust him? Fucking idiot. And another thing about Igor is that everyone thinks he was the original Dr. Frankenstein's assistant in the OG movie, when he didn't show up until this one, and the original Dr. Frankenstein is dead by the time Igor shows up. I think Young Frankenstein, the parody by Mel Brooks, which is pretty much a parody of this particular Frankenstein film, is the cause of that. And honestly, at the end of the day, I love how in many modern interpretations, Igor is associated with being the assistant of Dr. Frankenstein because the characters just fit so well together. And another thing, I keep saying that, or another good thing, is that Igor, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, in this movie, as well as the next, he's a straight-up villain, with Bela Lugosi's performance really bringing some life to these two movies. God knows it needs it, because without Colin Clive, ugh. I mean, the life went all out the window and was just completely missing for this film and the next with the absence of Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein. It's such a shame Clive died so young due to alcoholism and tuberculosis, I think it was, at the age of 37, back in 1937, funny enough. He truly was the special ingredient that elevated the original two movies with his magnetic and driven performance as the obsessed Dr. Henry Frankenstein. And I think that's why a large part of me thinks that Son of Frankenstein and the next one, Ghost of Frankenstein, just aren't in the same league as the original and Bride. Which leads me to my final issue I have with this film. Where the fuck is the bride? You're telling me the monster could survive the explosion and collapsing lab from the previous film, but the fucking bride can't? And they don't even acknowledge her whatsoever. I know some people will say, well, she was alive for all of 5 minutes and the public never saw her. That's true. However, you would think she would get a mention by Elizabeth, who told Wolf all about the monster, but she didn't even mention the bride one time, even though she actually saw her? Or fuck, Henry didn't mention her in his notes or his diary? What the fuck? Universal didn't know what to do with her, and they acted like she never existed in the sequels, which is crazy to me, considering Bride of Frankenstein is often cited as the best film in the series by the majority of fans. And to pretend she never happened is such an oversight and brain-dead move. I can't believe they didn't capitalize on her character, since they could have done whatever they wanted to if they brought her back for at least 2 more Frankenstein movies. And maybe even give her her own movie as the main star. You see, guys, I just can't let this go because she was so underutilized and underappreciated, it's criminal. I mean, overall, the movie, after rewatching it, after it's been a couple of years, it's not as bad as I previously thought it was. I mean, it does have some decent moments and ideas in it, especially with Igor. He's an interesting character since he pretty much carries this thing. But without Colin Clive as Dr. Frankenstein, without mentioning the fucking bride or even an appearance, I'm still mad about that. It's a step down, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't even mention this is Boris Karloff's last time playing the monster. And he's all right, but I could tell he was pretty much done after this, and he did not want to play the monster again because he figured he took the monster as far as he could possibly go. And as far as the monsters utilized in the movie, I mean, he barely does jack shit in this. I mean, he kind of feels like a step back in terms of developing his character. It's, I think on the Skeleton Crew, my favorite podcast, it was discussed that this felt like a regression of the character that Jamie Jenkins of the Skeleton Crew mentioned. And after looking at this film, I 100% agree, because in Bride of Frankenstein, he was learning, he was developing more complex emotions. It was actually pretty fascinating. While in this one, they took it back to the first movie, which I honestly didn't like that they did that. I wanted to have more of the monster developing. You don't just regress the character. And I know Jamie also mentioned the reason behind that is possibly because he was, depressed and he's just fed up and he just doesn't even want to live anymore, which I kind of understand. But at the same time, it's like, well, fuck. I mean, he should have at least had a few lines in the movie. But that's all I have to say about Son of Frankenstein. Out of 5 lightning bolts, let me just get to the review. I give it 2. It was just a big step back from the previous 2 films. Well, that's all I have to say about Son of Frankenstein. Let's move on to the next, Ghost of Frankenstein. Now on to Ghost of Frankenstein, released in 1942 and directed by Earl Ketton, and starring Cedric Hardwicke as Ludwig Frankenstein, the other son of the OG Dr. Frankenstein that we heard absolutely nothing about until now. Bela Lugosi returning as a not-dead Igor, Evelyn Ankers as Elsa Frankenstein, Barton Yarborough as Dr. Kettering, Lionel Atwell as Dr. Boomer, whatever the fuck, and a bunch of other people I didn't have the strength to mention since this movie barely had my attention. Now, the synopsis of the film is Igor, surviving his gunshot wounds from the previous films, discovers the monster also survives the sulfur pit, but was severely weakened, and he decides to take the monster to the other son of the late Dr. Henry Frankenstein, Ludwig von Frankenstein, whatever the fuck. How Igor knows about him is beyond me, but anyway, they go to Ludwig and convince him to help, and Ludwig decides to switch the abnormal brain of the monster with a healthy one. However, Igor has a sinister goal of his own, and that's the overall synopsis of the movie, so let's get into the meat of it with the whole story. So, the film kicks off with the villagers of Frankenstein Village complaining to the council how the town is suffering and believe they're under some sort of curse because of the Frankenstein castle, so they end up destroying it. Meanwhile, a very much alive Igor from the previous film discovers the monster having survived the sulfur pit as well and decides to take the monster to see the second son of Frankenstein, Dr. Ludwig Frankenstein, who can restore the monster to full strength. They head to the town of Visaria, where he lives and works with his assistants, Dr. Bulmer and Dr. Kettering. When they arrive, the monster befriends a young girl named Clostine. I think it's holy shit, what kind of fucking name is Clostine? Clostine, who helps retrieve her ball on a roof. Unfortunately, the monster in the process kills 2 villagers, and he is then overwhelmed by a mob of people and taken into custody. Jesus Christ, I can't talk. Igor goes to Ludwig and attempts to convince him to help the monster, but Ludwig refuses. During the monster's criminal hearing, Ludwig shows up and says he doesn't recognize him, which infuriates the monster, and he breaks his chains to escape, and he's led away by Igor. Igor and the monster break into Ludwig's laboratory, and the monster kills Dr. Kettering before being subdued with gas by Ludwig. Ludwig wants to kill the monster via dissection and asks Dr. Bulmer for assistance, which he refuses since he considers it murder. I don't know how, since, isn't he technically undead? I think so. I'm not honestly sure. I'm going to have to look that up. Anyway, Ludwig goes over his father's journals and notes when he's visited by the ghost of his father, not played by Colin Clive, might I add. It's a damn shame. Who proposes he give the monster a new brain to fix his temper and violence. Ludwig wants to put Kettering's brain in the monster. The monster wants the little girl's brain he bonded with earlier, and Igor wants his brain in the monster to be strong and powerful, and he schemes with Dr. Bulmer to achieve this. Igor's brain is put in the monster unknown to Ludwig, and unfortunately Igor goes blind because some bullshit about the wrong blood type not feeding the sensory nerves. I don't fucking know, it's movie science. So he starts wrecking the chateau that they're in, killing Dr. Bulmer in the process and mortally wounding Ludwig as the chateau goes up in flames with Elsa Frankenstein and Eric the Balesbaumman from earlier escape, and the movie ends with Ludwig, the monster, and Bulmer apparently all dying in the fire. Yeah, you guys can definitely hear my enthusiasm for this one. Let's get into the issues I have with this film. Other than the fact that I really didn't give a fuck about this movie. Hell, I could barely pay attention to make up this episode for it, so hell, why do you think I paired it with Son of Frankenstein? Fuck me, I really just want to get to the next 2 movies already. Movies I'll actually give a flying fuck about. Particularly the next one. Alright, let's get this shit over with. My issues with the film are that it's fucking boring and felt rushed despite having 3 years since the last installment. Now, I'll give it some credit for having a much better pacing and a shorter length than Son of Frankenstein, because that movie could have been cut at least 15 minutes and would have been much better for it. Meanwhile, this movie is almost 30 minutes shorter, and yet I was fucking nodding off, and it could barely keep my attention. This is the first film in the Frankenstein series where the monster is no longer played by Boris Karloff, but by another legendary monster actor, Lon Chaney Jr., who I'm very sad to say is a huge step down from Karloff in his version of the monster. Ugh, fuck, that hurt to say out loud since he's a fucking legend and plays my favorite Universal monster, the Wolfman. But I gotta be honest, his Frankenstein monster just didn't have the magic. And it doesn't help that he's, in my opinion, he's in the worst solo Frankenstein film. I used to think Son was worse, but after rewatching that film than this Ghost of Frankenstein back to back, I can say without any doubt that Son is better. Son had a more interesting story, a more interesting son, funny enough, of the original Dr. Frankenstein, because Ludwig fucking sucks, so no wonder they killed him off at the end, while Wolf got to live with his family and was praised as a hero at the end of his movie. Also, it feels weird that the monster we know is technically dead since Igor's brain is in the monster, and the future films ignore that aspect, but that's a whole nother can of worms. Anyway, I give this movie 1 lightning bolt out of 5. It's sad that Karloff stopped playing the monster, and I wish James Whale was kept as the director of these movies, since the decline in quality was evident when he left. Well, guys, that's all for this episode. Sorry it feels rushed and no audio clips from the films I didn't include at all for this episode. I just didn't give a fuck about these 2 movies in general. I couldn't get my excitement levels up for them. Although I will say, Son of Frankenstein does have some good merit to it, and I'm sure after future rewatches, it would get a much higher score from me. I doubt that for Ghost of Frankenstein, though. That film could fucking eat it for all I care. Well, until next episode, this has been Adam the Movie Guy. See you next time. I need a drink. Yeah!